Hi everyone, I am Erin from the WRLA and we are now live. Welcome to today's Teachable Tuesday webinar on the social media content calendar with Charmaine Jennings. During this webinar, you're going to learn how to create social media guidelines tailored to your business. Charmaine has done quite a few webinars for us in the past. So if you want to visit any of those, please go to our website at www.wrla.org/events/webinars and just scroll all the way down to the bottom to past webinars and you will see hers there. In addition to being able to check out Charmaine's past webinars, she is also providing our members with discounts on social media, marketing, content, and strategy reporting. We will provide that information when we send out the webinar post emails. All right, I do quickly want to say that Charmaine is also back with us again on November 17th. We have revamped her topics to now be how to create holiday marketing campaigns. So if you're interested in that, please register. So before we get started, I am not sure if you've heard, but we are unable to have a live show this year. However, we are going forward with a revised version and are calling it Showcase with a Twist. This new format is the next best thing to meeting in person with an innovative show format that combines print, app, Zoom, and social media. If you're a supplier and have not yet heard of this great opportunity, please contact any of us at the office. We're more than happy to go through the options. And if you are a dealer, stay posted on more details on PK sessions, education, show specials, and so much more. All right, so who's hosting? I am Erin, and I am your member services and solutions manager. And with me is Jessica, and she is your trade show and events manager. Just a few quick housekeeping items. All our attendees are muted, so you should be able to hear myself, Jess, and Charmaine. If you have any questions, there's a chat function at the bottom of the screen. Please type in the questions if you have them, and we will facilitate them at the end. And a recording of the webinar will be sent out post-webinar along with Charmaine's discount that she is providing. Okay, so now who is doing today's webinar? Well, this would be Charmaine Jennings. She is the owner of Strategic Charm Boutique. Charmaine is a social media guru, helps entrepreneurs share their brand, stories, and connects with their, I just gotta move you over here. Connects with dream clients and customers on Instagram and other online platforms. She works hard to help small business owners find their voice and define their message so that they can confidently communicate their passion for their industry, the work they do, and the value of their offers. You'll see all her handles. She's on Instagram, she's on Twitter, her email, and her website. Okay, so I think that is everything. So all right, Charmaine, if you want to take it from here and tell us all about how to create a social calendar.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erin and Jessica, for having me back. I'm very excited to be here with you guys today and to share some insight about social media and how to create guidelines for your company. So I'm just going to share my presentation with you all here. Hopefully you all can see that. If not, just let me know. All right, so like I just said, today we're going to be talking about creating social media company guidelines for your small business. So during this webinar, you're going to learn how to create social media guidelines tailored to your business. So this guide will serve as an information kit about key social media platforms that your business is using and your objectives for each platform, rules and regulations about how to use your brand fonts and logos and other creative assets, and that will talk about the language of your company and more. So this guide will be useful to any individual or team responsible for managing your company's social media and can be passed along to your next communications or social media manager as your company continues to shift. So we're going to do a poll shortly about how many people you have working on your social media. I want to know if it's just you or if you have multiple people. So feel free to answer the poll that's popping up on the screen right now, just so I can get a sense for where you're at. Even if you have just one person right now, maybe you're the sole person working on your social media, having social media company guidelines is still handy, because in the event that you do want to hire a social media manager or you want to delegate social media to a current team member, you want to be able to say, hey, here's what we do, here's what we need, here are the guidelines you want to follow. If you feel like you do want to manage your own social media forever, that's fine too, but it's still important to have a set of guidelines that you can refer back to make sure everything you're doing is strategic and on brand, and that's helping you get closer to your goals. So whether you have one person on your social media or 10 people, having these guidelines are going to be highly beneficial for you. Okay, actually a couple of you have more than 3, that's awesome. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Yes, I feel like the more people you have, the more crucial this becomes, right? Because if you have 3 or more people managing your social media, there is tons of room for error, right? You're gonna increase your likelihood of having, wrong images or misusing of your logo, or the messaging could be off. I'm not saying it's bad to have that many people on your social media, but that's where these guidelines are going to be really important to make sure everything blends well together, right? Just because you have 3 or 5 people managing social media, it shouldn't sound like 3 or 5 different voices, right? So we'll talk about how to make that more succinct and on-brand. Awesome. Perfect. I think I just shared those results with you. Okay. All right, let's continue. So, benefits of having social media guidelines. 1, it lays the foundation for an effective social media strategy. Now, the fact that you have a social media platform and that you share content isn't a strategy on its own, right? You really need to think about exactly what type of content you're sharing, onto what platform, when you're sharing it, how it sounds, how it looks, what your goals are. Those are things that lay the foundation for a strategy, and having these guidelines is a starting point. So I don't want you to confuse these guidelines with an actual strategy. It's just that starting point to get you going. It also ensures your brand voice is consistent across all platforms. Like I said, if you have 3 different people managing your social media and creating and sharing content, every individual is going to have a slightly different voice, but you want to make sure that the overall voice is reflective of your company and not sounding like 3 different people are writing your content. It also ensures that your imagery is on brand and then consistent across all platforms. So you want to make sure the photos are in line with what your company is about, and that are on brand in terms of fonts, colors, logos, and things like that. And you want to make sure that those visuals are consistent whether you're on Instagram, Facebook, or your website. It also outlines expectations for post frequency, right? So in your guidelines, you want to make it clear, okay, we post to Instagram once a day, Monday to Friday, or we post to our Facebook page 3 times a week, or we share articles on LinkedIn once a month. You want to make sure it's clear how often you're posting to each platform. You're also going to use your social media guidelines to define your target audience and ensure that they're top of mind when you or your team members are creating and sharing content. Right? At the end of the day, you are a business and you're trying to serve clients or customers. So you want to make sure the content that's being created is created with them in mind to attract them to your social media, lead them to your website or to your physical location, and to start closing some of those sales. So at minimum, your social media guidelines should include the following sections. So a section about your brand, so a bit about the company. It should also include some of your goals. So your business goals that your social media can support, your target audience or who you're trying to sell or promote to. Social media platforms, so it should tell you your guideline should outline exactly what platforms you're on, right? So it should list, yes, we're on Facebook, yes, we're on Twitter, yes, we're on Instagram, or wherever else you are. It should include information about your brand voice, so how you sound and speak to your clients and customers. Your brand visuals, so again, different photos and logos. And it should also include information about the actual content creation for your business as well. Just a reminder, if you have any questions at any time, feel free to put them in the chat box and we will make sure we get those answered for you. So let's talk about the brand. So in your guidelines, you want to have a company description. Now you might think, what's the point of having a description? We all work here. We know exactly who we are, what we do, but it's a bit different when you put it in writing and it's written in a way that speaks to the strategy of you promoting your content and promoting your business, right? So I think it's really important to have that description and include 1 or 2 paragraphs about who you are, exactly what it is you do, and who you serve to ensure everyone's on the same page. You also want to include a mission statement if you don't have one already. If you do have a mission statement, it's likely something that you've put on your website, so you can repurpose that for your social media guidelines. Your mission statement defines your company's objective and your approach to reach those objectives, right? So it's the heart of what you're doing and why. Your vision statement is kind of like your long-term purpose and your long-term goals for your company, and that kind of shapes the overall direction and future of your company. So I will show you an example in a few seconds. You also want to communicate your company values in your social media guidelines as well. So what you believe in as a company, your philosophies, principles that drive your company. Your core values is what supports your vision and what shapes the culture of your company, right? So it shapes your team members and how they communicate, not just with your customers, but with one another. And those are things that are important to keep in mind when you are sharing content. And one thing that's optional is including some history about the company or fun facts. Again, that just kind of adds to shaping out or building out what your company is all about and how they got started, which can be very valuable when it comes to creating social media content. So these are all things you want to include in the about section of your social media guidelines. You can make them as in-depth or as simple as you want to. Again, the more information, the better, just because it makes it easier for people to understand it, but you want to include at least these basic elements. So here's an example from Uber. So their mission statement is, Uber's mission is to bring transportation for everyone, everywhere. Now, although I'm using this as an example, I do think Uber can do a little bit of a better job with their mission. So your mission statement should talk about what you want to do, what you're setting out to achieve, and exactly how you're going to do that. And with Uber, they're missing the how, right? So although I'm using it as an example, I want to show you that there is a small element of that missing, but their vision statement is really good. So their vision statement is smarter transportation with fewer cars and greater access. Transportation that's safer, cheaper, and more reliable. Transportation that creates more job opportunities and higher incomes for drivers. Right? So again, you can see how their vision is more long-term goals and it's more of their purpose as opposed to just listing their products and services. So those are the difference between mission and vision. Okay, let's talk about some of your goals. So outline company goals that can be supported through your social media. That's what you should have in your social media guidelines. Remember, these goals will change over time, so it's important to update the section of your guidelines and social media strategy throughout the year, right? So if right now you list your goals in your company guidelines, you don't want to let it sit there for another year because chances are things are going to change, especially in the climate we're seeing now with the pandemic and who knows what might be coming up, right? So you want to make sure you are shifting with the time. So you need to revisit this section of your social media guidelines and your social media strategy on a regular basis. Now, again, outlining your goals is important because when it comes to social media, it's not about posting just to post and just to show that your company's on social media. You want to be posting and sharing content for a reason, right? So it's really important to highlight goals of your business that your social media strategy can support, right? So the best goals are SMART goals. So SMART is an acronym meaning that all of your goals should be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound, right? So specific, for example, instead of saying we want to increase sales, every business, every company wants to increase sales, right? If my business makes $5,000 a month and my goal is to increase sales, and next month I make $5,001, does that mean I met my goal? Probably not, right? Because my goal wasn't specific, I don't know exactly how I'm going to measure that success, right? So you'd want to say, okay, if we're going to increase sales, our goal is to increase sales by 15% by the end of fourth quarter, for example, right? That leads into making sure your goals are measurable as well. Adding that percentage or a dollar amount is going to make your goal measurable, so it's easy for you to see if you've achieved that goal. You want to make sure it's also attainable, right? So if you're making $5,000 a month, for example, and your goal for next month is to make $50,000, I mean, it's maybe possible depending on the nature of your business, but chances are that's going to be an unattainable, unrealistic goal, right? So I know for myself, I'd rather set, smaller goals and then surprise myself by surpassing it greatly, or maybe reach for the stars a little bit so I can get as close to that bigger goal as possible. You also want to make sure they're relevant and make sense for what you're doing. So a lot of people say, you know what, our goal is to increase our followers on Instagram. That could be a good goal, but why is that relevant to your business, and why is it relevant to the overall objectives of your company, right? So you want to make sure it makes sense for what you're doing and where you're trying to go. And then you want to make sure they're time bound, so put a deadline on it, right? I'm not going to have an open-ended goal that says, I want to increase sales. Of course I want to increase sales, but again, you want to increase sales by this much and by this date, right? So if you have a goal to increase your sales by 20% in 6 months, then at least in the halfway mark, you can check, okay, are we halfway on track to that goal? If so, awesome. If not, what do we need to do with our social media strategy? What can we adjust to get us closer to meeting that goal? Target audience. So target audience is definitely something you want to make sure is a prominent part of your social media guidelines and your social media strategy. So in order to communicate effectively online and drive traffic to your business, it's important to be specific on your target audience and ideal customer. Your guidelines should include a brief description of your target audience as a whole, so this is kind of generally, but still specific, and a buyer persona that outlines the specific demographics and behaviors of your ideal customer. Right now, sometimes it feels weird to get really specific on one type of ideal customer because you can probably serve a lot of different people. But the more specific you are on the ideal customer you're going to attract, the more likely you're going to attract those people, but also catch other people outside of that description who also want to buy from your business. So when you're creating a buyer persona, again, you're thinking of one type of person you want to attract the most to your business, or who you think would benefit from your business the most. Get really specific and think of an actual human being in your mind and start giving them, start outlining their demographics and their characteristics, right? When you do that, it makes it so much easier to think about who you're trying to create your content for, which is going to help drive traffic to your website and to your physical location if you have one, right? So one type of buyer persona is B2C, so business to consumer. So if you have customers, for example, when you're creating a buyer persona, you want to give them a name, right? So let's call this guy Keith, for example. You want to give them an age as well. So let's say Keith is 37. You want to give them a location. The location is important depending on how your business runs, right? So maybe your physical location and people actually have to physically walk to your shop to buy stuff. Maybe you are online and you can serve all of Manitoba or all of Canada or wherever you are. It's important to think about location because you want to make sure it's known exactly who you serve and where they can buy from you. You want to list their occupation or salary. It might not seem like an important element to know exactly what they do or how much they make, but knowing how much or thinking about how much your ideal customer makes is going to really shape how you talk to them, right? And how you drive them to your products and services, right? So if you are a company who feels like, okay, we have really low affordable prices, someone who is making a little bit less money and who's budget conscious is going to be drawn to the fact that you have low and affordable prices, right? Whereas someone who's making a significant amount of money might want more so of the high-end items that you're selling, or some premium products, right? So it's really important to kind of think about their finances and if they are financially in line with the types of products and services that you do offer. You also want to think about their hobbies and interests. Again, this might not seem important because you're like, well, if they're a homeowner who likes DIY projects, that's all I need to know. But you want to think about other things about them that's going to help you create content that attracts them, right? So for example, if I'm someone who, yes, likes to do DIY projects around the house, but I also like swimming, it'd be interesting to see how you can fit swimming into your content, because that's what's going to attract me and drive me to your content, right? I'm not saying that every single hobby that you think your ideal customer does needs to be expressed in your social media, because maybe you can't find a connection between swimming and what it is that your business does. But the more you can reach out to your potential clients and customers on social media and draw them in with things that interest them, the more likely they're going to engage with your content and turn into a paying customer. I also want to think about their purchasing habits. So again, like how much money are they spending on DIY products, for example? And are they buying things after seeing an ad on social media? Are they buying things based on word of mouth? So maybe their friends bought a really cool product and they see them as some sort of influence. So once their friend says, hey, I bought this new chainsaw, you should buy it too. Is that how they're influenced with their purchasing habits? Or is there something else that, that drives those spending habits for them? You also want to think about what struggles and challenges your ideal customer has that your business can support, right? Everyone, no matter what you do, who you are, we want someone to solve our problems, right? Now, the problems your ideal customer has might not be super in-depth, deep emotional problems, of course, but think about different challenges they might have that your business or your products can be there to support, to make some aspect of their life easier. Think about what social media platforms they use regularly. If your ideal customers are mostly on Instagram and Pinterest, then you might not want to use Facebook as often because you don't think they're hanging out there. Or you might not want to use Twitter as often because they're not spending time there. Really think about where they are hanging out online. Like I've been saying, you want to outline some content topics or ideas that would speak to this buyer persona, to this specific ideal client or customer, to try and draw them in. And it's always good to include a photo as well. So chances are it's not going to be a photo of a real person. You can, of course, use a stock photo that represents the type of ideal customer you're trying to attract. So this is just an example. It's kind of blurry. It's an example of a buyer persona that a coffee company in San Francisco put together. So they're trying to attract this student, and they included a whole bunch of information about her daily life, her life story, her household income, what platform she's on, things she needs to, challenges or struggles she has that this company, this coffee company, can support, talking about her influences, so like her friends and her colleagues, her other pain points. So, you know, she's making what, $30,000 a year. She's a student, so maybe not being able to pay her bills on time, things like that. And then they included some solutions that their company can support to manage her pain points, struggles, or challenges. This is just another example of a buyer persona. You can create a buyer persona in any format you want, whatever works best for you and your skill level. One thing I like about this buyer persona is that they included a little bit of a graph about their social media activity, right? So they did some research on their ideal customer or volunteer, and his name is John Doe. And based on his demographics and his habits, they figured, okay, you know what? He's mostly on Facebook, Instagram, not Twitter as much, but Snapchat, right? So referring back to this in your social media guidelines, we'll say, hey, you know what? Because we've identified our ideal client as someone who's being heavily on Facebook, we are spending way too much time on Twitter, and that's not where they are. So maybe we need to adjust so we have more content, more engaging content on Facebook, because that's where they're hanging out. They also included some of their current feelings and some personality traits as well that really helps tie your buyer persona together. Another type of buyer persona is business to business, so B2B. So it's kind of a similar structure for trying to outline who they are, the demographics and their habits. So name, age, location, but you want to also include what industry they're in, what job title they might have, because if you are someone who is selling to other businesses, there are certain people with different roles that you want to approach to buy from you or work with your business in some way. You want to list a few details of their role, so things that their job title encompasses. You also want to note whether or not this person is the decision maker. So is this person the last point of contact who decides yes or no to working with you or buying from you? Or do they have to report to their higher ups to get approval for whatever it is they're trying to do with your company? You also want to think about the size of the organization, organizational struggles and challenges that your business can support, or collaboration opportunities you can have with this other company, what social media platforms their company is using regularly, but also the individual, because sometimes, you know, even though you're off the clock and you're at home having wine and dinner, sometimes you're still on your personal social media and see things related to your day job that you want to take back to your office. And then again, content that speaks to these people and a photo that kind of represents who you're trying to attract business-wise. So another example of a buyer persona that is B2B. So again, it has this title. This guy is not a decision maker. So he has to report to someone to get approval to work with you or buy from you. Talks about his industry, his salary, his education, some of his goals, challenges, and how, this is the important part, is how their company can help John Johnson. And then some strategy around messaging that would attract this individual. Same thing, another one where it's marketing Mary, and it's just another example of how you can lay out your buyer persona and what information you can include that's going to help you attract them with your social media content. All right, social media profiles. So your guidelines should list the social media platforms your company is using and provide info on how they're being used. Remember, your company does not need to be on 5 different platforms in order to build a strong online presence. It's important to be strategic by choosing platforms that fit the nature of your brand, message, and target audience. Right? So even if somehow you decide, you know what, our target audience is people who does use Pinterest and Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. Let's say there are 5 platforms that your audience is regularly on. It still doesn't mean you have to be on all 5 at all times. If you spread yourself too thin, even with a team of 5 people, you're not going to be as effective on any platform, right? So I always advise it's better to stick with 1 or 2 platforms, build those up really well, build a strategy around it, test some content, have some trial and error. And once you feel super confident with your Instagram and your Facebook, for example, then start thinking about, okay, now how can we work in Pinterest? Okay, build up your Pinterest really well. Okay, now that we have more time, more resources, more knowledge, how can we work in LinkedIn? Right? So it's better to start with 1 or 2 core platforms and do those really, really well, build those up. And then when you're comfortable, you can add in other ones, right? That's going to be more helpful to you than being on all platforms just because, and now you're scrambling and struggling to create content for each because it's too much for you to handle and too much for you to manage, right? Being on too many platforms also leads you to post and ghost. So post and ghost means that you share content to a platform, but then you don't go back to that platform until you share your next piece of content. When you post and ghost, a lot of people are trying to engage with you. They're asking you questions, sending you DMs, commenting on your posts, but because you've just posted it and left, they're not getting a response from you, right? So that's going to really decrease your engagement, and your engagement is a huge factor in the success of your social media, and it's what helps drive traffic to your business, right? So that's why it's important to really focus on a couple of platforms that you can manage and do well, and then add in other ones if needed as you go. So in the section of your social media guidelines, you want to list all of your social media handles and usernames so they're easy for whoever's looking at your guidelines to find. I don't recommend putting your passwords into your social media guidelines necessarily. You could if you want to, but passwords change on a regular basis, so you'd have to make sure you update this quite frequently to make sure the passwords are up to date. And maybe you want to share your social media guidelines with someone who is not necessarily working on your social media, but you just want to show your guidelines to them, but you don't want them to have access, right? So having your passwords in there might not be the best idea depending on who you're sharing it with. You want to list your platforms in order of importance, right? So even if you do have 2 key social media platforms, for me, it's Instagram and Facebook. I'm going to list Instagram first because that's my #1 platform, and then Facebook is secondary. I'll make that known in my social media guidelines. You also want to include type of content to share to each platform. So you can include some topic ideas. You can speak to the length of the captions you want to share. So some companies only share a few sentences per caption on Instagram. Some people share like a whole paragraph or a few paragraphs. You want to make sure you let whoever's reading your social media guidelines understand, okay, here's the typical length of caption we share on Instagram. We share about 150 to 200 words, or we share 3 to 5 sentences on Facebook. Make sure that's clear for your social media team. And anything else that we need to know about the content for each platform. You also want to include areas of the platform that are different areas of the platform that are utilized and how, right? So if you're using Instagram, Instagram is a multi-layer platform. So there's posting to your feed, there's stories, there's doing live video, there's IGTV, there's Reels, which is new. You want to outline in this section of your social media guidelines if you're using those extra features and how. Right? So maybe you're not using live video there and that's fine, but make sure that's clear in your social media guidelines. So whoever's working on social media isn't thinking, oh no, I need to do a live video, or I need to figure out how to make an IGT video, right? Figure out exactly what key features you're using regularly and make it known in your social media guidelines how you're using those features. So how you're using stories, how you're using IGTV. So I included some charts about the key demographics of the different social media platforms, which might help you determine if certain platforms are right for you and your target audience. So when you're looking at this, this is from July of this year, so it's the most up-to-date version I can find. So the way to read it is, so for example, 18 to 29-year-olds, it's saying that 79% of 18 to 29-year-olds are on Facebook. It's not saying that 79% of Facebook is 18 to 29-year-olds, if that makes sense. So this kind of tells you the key demographics, and then also included some user behaviors. So really just telling you how many people are on the platform, how long they're spending on the platform, and how they're using other features, right? Because even if your age demographic is on Facebook regularly, it still doesn't mean that they use it in a way that's going to benefit your company, right? So if we go back and look and say, okay, you know what? 65 plus, 46% of that audience is on Facebook, right? So you're like, okay, you know what? That's a good enough percentage for us to feel like we need to be on there for them. And that could absolutely be true. But you want to make sure, okay, is that demographic using Facebook to get information about the types of products we have or the type of company we have, right? I think a better example of that would be ages, let's see, 18 to 29, right? So let's say you've decided your ideal client or customer is ages 35 plus, and you are looking like, you know what, there is a lot of 18 to 29-year-olds on here. Should we use this to entice them or to reach out to them? It's totally up to you, but you really want to focus on who your key demographic is, where they're spending time, and how they're spending time there, right? Because again, not everyone who's on Facebook regularly is on it connecting with businesses. So those are things to consider when you're choosing your platforms. I would say one of the benefits about Facebook is that it's easy to share content. So if you share a really cool DIY project or really good tips or things like that, people are likely to share that to their personal Facebook profiles, which is handy because hopefully that will attract their friends and their family. And hopefully that brings more traffic to your Facebook page, more likes and follows to your Facebook page, and then more engagement with your content. So that is one of the benefits of Facebook, is that it's easy to share content. You can create ads on Facebook. Well, really on any social media platform, but Facebook has a really good ad system where you can really do some detailed targeting for who exactly you want to attract. So if you go back and look at your buyer persona, you can include every detail about your buyer persona in your in your Facebook ads, and really get in front of your target audience, so you're not spending money trying to reach people who wouldn't invest in your business. So there are some benefits to Facebook for sure. I included some key demographics about Instagram as well. Again, looking at these charts are helpful, but also just keep in mind how people are using this platform, right? So you might look at this and say, you know what, our target audience is 35 to 40, but it looks like only half of that age group is on Instagram. It doesn't mean that Instagram isn't a viable option for you. That's not going to help you grow your business. It's really kind of getting to their mindset and trying to figure out how they're using this platform. So on Instagram, they have over 500 million daily active users. So that means over 500 million people are on it daily. And over 400 million are watching stories on a regular basis. So again, with Instagram, it's a multi-level platform. Again, there's your feed, stories, lives, things like that. A lot of people are watching stories because it's a bit more accessible sometimes than your feed. Right? So you can be sitting at your desk or getting ready in the morning, and you can prop your phone up and have your stories kind of play on a loop while you're doing something else, and you can be hands-free. Whereas if you're trying to engage with people's posts on their feed, you actually have to be holding your phone and scrolling to do that. So because it's a bit easier to take in story content, more people are gravitating towards that aspect of the platform. Not to say there isn't benefit to posting to your feed. I would definitely recommend doing both on a regular basis. But if you're on Instagram for business and you're not utilizing stories, that is a huge missed opportunity for your company. So the average user spends 53 minutes on Instagram, and 90% of users follow at least one business account. And I think that number is probably growing because, again, Instagram has so many features that that really help businesses create and share content in a way that draws in their target audience, right? So there are tons of different ways you can utilize a platform to grow your online audience. So I included some stats about Twitter as well. We won't get into Twitter too much. I don't even use Twitter that often. It doesn't mean I couldn't. I do have a target audience on Twitter. I think Twitter is really good for B2B brands, so business to business. And my business is business to business, but even still, I'm trying to focus on Instagram primarily and Facebook secondary, right? So even though I think there's value in me being on Twitter, I'm still not there because I want to make sure I'm building up my other platforms first. Yeah, so you see 67% of all B2B businesses are using Twitter as a digital marketing tool, which is great. Again, if you have the resources and if you decide that a good chunk of your audience is probably on Twitter, then yes, you want to adapt that into your social media strategy and create some parameters around it in your social media guidelines. Pinterest as well I included because I feel with a lot of you, again, I use DIY as an example a lot, and I think Pinterest is a great, great platform when it comes to sharing DIY projects or home renovations and things like that. So there's probably a good target audience on here for a lot of you, but again, it depends on your capacity for social media and whether or not you can take this on. With Pinterest, I think the challenge for a lot of people is you ideally want to share multiple pins per day, and the pins you share, you have to create and design, right? So when you're sharing content to Facebook or Twitter, technically you can do just text. It doesn't have to be images. I always include an image because it's more eye-catching and will increase your chances of engagement. But you technically don't have to share an image or a graphic with your tweets or with your Facebook posts. With Instagram, you do. You have to share a picture or video of some sort. And with Pinterest, a lot of it is based just on your images, right? So with Pinterest, when you're creating pins, you do need to design it a little bit, right? So you can just throw up a picture and turn that into a pin, but it's probably not going to get as much engagement as if you actually designed it, size it for Pinterest, and included some text on it as well. So I think because there's a couple extra layers to the design of your pins, some people, put Pinterest to the wayside because it seems like too much work. But when you use resources like Canva or Adobe Spark, they're free online platforms that help you create different social media graphics, Pinterest included. They give you lots and lots of templates you can use. So all you have to do is just upload your own images and write some text on there, and it's pretty much designed for you. So I do think a lot of your target audience, depending on exactly the nature of your business, is probably on Pinterest, especially again, DIY and home renovation crowds. But again, it depends on what capacity you have for this platform. So I included some stats about Pinterest users and their behaviors. So you can take a look at this a bit later as well, but there's a lot of women on Pinterest. There are men on Pinterest as well. I think sometimes people think, oh, our target audience is men, so we're not going to use Pinterest, but men are on there, right? 40% of dads on Pinterest use it to shop and plan for fatherhood. And I saw more statistics about them using it to search for, again, home renovation tips, DIY projects they can do with their kids, things like that. So there's a lot of potential with this platform. All right, brand voice. So your brand voice refers to the personality and emotion associated with your company's in-person and online communications. The reason why I say in-person and online is because the way you write or share content on your social media should be the same way your company interacts with clients in person or customers in person as well. So you want to make sure your brand voice is consistent, whether it's online or offline. It includes everything from the words and language you use to the visual media that you share. So when defining your brand voice, you need to keep the voice and understanding of your target audience in mind to ensure you're communicating with ideal clients on their level. Right? So for me, because my business is marketing, I can use a whole bunch of jargon in my social media content. I can talk about SEO and ROI and B2B and B2C and all these different things that people who aren't really in marketing or who are new to business don't understand. But that shows that I'm not understanding my target audience and how they speak and what they understand and their level of education in what I'm doing, right? So make sure that you are speaking to your target audience in their own language and their words while still making it on brand for your company. So in the section of your social media guidelines, you want to write a paragraph describing your voice. You want to include a list of words that describe your brand's voice, whether it's playful or authoritative, insightful, welcoming, humble. These are words that are going to help whoever's writing your content write it in a way that fits these different descriptions. You also want to include key phrases or quotes that your brand has used in the past or would use in your content, right? So it just gives whoever's creating your content a better example of how you speak online and in person to your clients and customers. And also include a list of do's and don'ts when it comes to your brand voice. So maybe there's phrases or words you don't want to incorporate, or maybe there's a tone of voice that is really far off from your brand. Those are things you want to make sure are outlined clearly in your social media guidelines. So I did include an example of a brand voice chart. You don't have to create it in a chart format for your social media guidelines. You can use whatever format works best for you, but I like this because it tells you the different characteristics of the brand's voice, and then a bit of a description in case it's not clear, because you can say your brand voice is passionate, but passionate means different things to different people. So it's important to include a bit of a description to further explain what that is. And then the do's and don'ts as well, right? So something like this is really helpful. Even if it's not social media related, you should have this somewhere anyways, right? So even if you decide, you know what, I'm not going to create social media guidelines for our company, we're too busy, you should at least do this. So that's really going to help with other online pieces that you have. So like your website, for example, and the voice on your website. And it also helps communicate to your team how they should be communicating with your clients and customers and other team members. Brand visuals. So to achieve good brand recognition, it's important to ensure your visuals are consistent across all online platforms. So social media, your website, email marketing, things like that. When it comes to your logo and other brand elements, you want to include the following in your social media guidelines. So all variations of your logo, and you should have multiple. So if you have one logo and that's it, you definitely want to have it created so it fits on different social media platforms and different printed materials. And it's just handy to have, right? So I always recommend people have at least 2 variations of the logo. So a horizontal and vertical, or you might want to have just a watermark of your logo as well. So the small part of your logo. So for me, for example, my logo is, actually it's right behind me. You've seen it. So my logo is this here. So the watermark, I'm not sure if you can see it, but the watermark of my logo would just be the 4-leaf clover, right? So you want to make sure you have these different variations for different platforms and different design elements. You also want to include the do's and don'ts about logo alterations. So chances are if you have a logo, you don't want anyone changing the color or the orientation or stretching it or putting it on certain types of design elements. So you want to make sure those are clearly outlined in your brand guidelines. You also want to include the color codes of your logo to make sure that anything that's being designed visually for your online platforms are on brand, right? So here you can see I have that teal color in the bottom right. That is the exact color code of my clover that's in my logo, right? So anytime any of my team members design something for our social media, they make sure they use that exact color code to make sure everything we post is going to be on brand. So we don't have 10 different variations of green and blue floating around, making things look kind of sloppy. You want to also incorporate color codes of complementary brand colors. So let's say your logo is just the teal and yellow, right? Doesn't mean all your posts are just going to be teal and yellow, right? You want to also include, okay, these are our main colors, but here are some other colors that go with the colors of our brand and our logo. You also want to include your fonts as well. So when you're designing a sort of graphic or poster or online flyer for social media, you want to make sure your fonts are consistent. So you're not using 20 different fonts and having things look a bit sloppy. You want to make sure you're trying to use about 2, right? So maybe a header font and a body text font. And then other fonts that might complement your brand if needed. So in addition to guidelines about your logo and other brand elements, you want to include information about what type of imagery reflects your brand. So describe and provide example of images that are on brand, along with a description and examples of images that are not in line with your brand at all, right? So for me, because I'm in marketing and social media and business, we share a lot of stock photos of, laptops and iMacs and iPhones and things like that, because it relates to who we are and what we do. We share a lot of pictures of women because we work with a lot of women in our company. And those are things that we curate for our social media. So one platform I love to use for free stock photos is Unsplash. So it's unsplash.com. And you can go in and type in lots of different things and find a ton of great high quality images, right? So for this image, for example, all I have to do is go to unsplash.com, type in girl painting, and this is one of the images that pops up, right? So for your brand, for your social media guidelines, you can curate a whole bunch of different images that are aligned with your brand and put them into your guidelines as an example, and then mention any type of imagery that you want to stay away from. So the last important section of your social media guidelines is about the content creation. So content is the meat and potatoes of your social media. It's important to provide an overview on what type of written content should be created and shared within your online community. So in this section of your social media guidelines, again, you want to have a list of key topics to touch on regularly for each platform. Key topics to touch on for things like lives, stories, reels, IGTV. You want to also share instructions for how to create and share content to additional platforms mentioned above. You also definitely want to include how you acknowledge like different holidays like Thanksgiving, Canada Day, Halloween, other milestones in your business that you want to highlight. So maybe your 2-year anniversary in business is coming up and you want that to be mentioned on social media, or anything that you want to acknowledge, whether it's an event happening, probably not an event, but whether it's something happening in your city that is somehow related to your business or your brand or things like that. You can also incorporate mentions of social media holidays, like made up holidays like National Dog Day, National Donut Day, those kind of things. Those are things that you can mention into your guidelines as well as things that you want to make sure are being touched on every year. You also want to list key products and services that you want to promote regularly. So maybe some things that you offer are just seasonal, which you can mention in your guidelines as well. But if there are key things that you offer or key things that your brand is known for, make sure those are being communicated on your social media on a consistent basis. So at least a couple times a week, we should see information that relates back to that product or service that you offer. You also want to list out the days and times that you're supposed to post to each platform. Now this varies. Generally speaking, the best time to post on social media in general is in the morning. So for Instagram, for example, it's between 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. generally, but it really depends on your specific followers. So sometimes what I like to do with clients is we'll test it. We'll post at like 10:30 a.m. every day for a week or two. And then the next week we'll post at like 5:30 p.m. and see kind of how that works and see what the difference in engagement is. And once we do a couple of tests, we can kind of determine, okay, this seems to be the time where we get the most engagement. So we'll write that down. And now we know for the social media guidelines, we're going to post to Instagram every day, Monday to Friday at 9:45 a.m., for example. So make sure that's included in your guidelines. Also want to include the frequency of posts for each platform. So, generally speaking, once a day on Instagram is ideal, whether it's Monday to Friday or 7 days a week. 3 to 7 times a week on Facebook, a bunch of tweets if you're on Twitter. So 5 to 10 tweets per day is good for that. But you want to make sure that it is outlined clearly in your guidelines. You also want to mention and provide information on any scheduling tools you might be using for social media. So if you have Planoly or Later or Hootsuite that you're using to schedule your content, make sure that is mentioned in your guidelines with the usernames. Again, if you want to put passwords in there, you can, but just make sure you update it regularly or leave them out if other people are going to look at this document who aren't associated with your social media. When it comes to Instagram and Twitter, you want to use hashtags, right? So hashtags are a whole big thing. I know we've talked about it a bunch of times in different webinars, but once you find a list of hashtags that you use for your business, for your company, you want to make sure the key ones you use regularly are listed in your social media guidelines. So whoever's doing your social media, whoever takes it over, knows to incorporate them into your content. And then a list of resources that can be used for visual content. So either sourcing stock images or resources that can be used to create photos or graphics, or platforms that can be used to edit any photos that you might take. So Unsplash, I mentioned, is what you can use to download free high quality stock images. So like this image, for example, is from Unsplash. Canva and Adobe Spark are both platforms. Again, they're free, and you can use them to create different graphics or posters or ads or things like that. And then Lightroom is a platform or an app that you can use to edit your photos. So if you take your own photos, you can use Lightroom to edit the texture of your image or the brightness or contrast or anything you need to do to it to make it a bit more appealing for your social media. And then I end with a list of different content ideas you can incorporate into your content. Again, some of these are things you want to incorporate into your content on a regular basis. And if so, make sure that's outlined in your social media guidelines. One thing I like to mention that's coming up in November is a bunch of little like business related holidays happening near the end of November. So Black Friday is coming up November 27th, Small Business Saturday, Cyber Monday, Giving Tuesday. Those are all things that you want to prepare for in advance, which we'll talk a little bit about in our next webinar on November 17th. But I wanted to make sure I call attention to those because they're coming up, and you probably want to do some brainstorming now about these different sales holidays. And that is it for my presentation.
Thanks, Charmaine.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so we did have some questions while you were chatting, and I have a two-part question from someone, which is, first question is about, it's about influencers. So what value do they add to a company's social media goals?
It could be a lot depending on who the influencer is, right? So with an influencer, when you're trying to find people to help promote your company or your products or your services, you want to find people who likely have a target audience similar to your ideal clients and customers, right? So if you find an influencer, for example, I can't remember her name. Oh, it's gonna bug me. Her handle is R Barnes Yard on Instagram. She's based in Manitoba. She does a lot of home renovations and DIY projects, and she's considered an influencer, right? So a lot of like home building companies will team up with her and work with her because they know she has a very specific target audience that is the same niche as their ideal customers. Okay. So with her, because she's promoting the company, but she's not an employee. So that somehow adds an extra layer of trust, right? So with her followers, they feel that she is a friend and she's trustworthy and they want to know what she's doing. So they're more likely to buy something based on her recommendation than just on a generic ad they see on social media.
Okay, so the second part of that question is then, should a company social media guideline include how to use or partner with an influencer?
100%, yes. If that's the route you're taking, you definitely want to include that. So if you're working with influencers already, you can list the current influencers you're working with and how, or you can kind of create like a buyer persona or an influencer persona for the type of influencers you want to work with. So include what their key platform is going to be. So you want to look for someone who's on Instagram, for example. You also want to include how old they are, and you want to include requirements for how big their social media is, right? So some businesses won't work with influencers who have less than 10,000 followers or less than 100,000, right? So if that's one of your rules, make sure that's in your guidelines.
Okay. Do influencers usually have this kind of information to when you reach out to them that they would automatically share with you? Or would this be something you'd need to sort of seek out yourself?
It kind of depends. So if you're looking, most influencers are on Instagram, and that's usually why you're connecting with them. So you can easily look at their followers and see how many they have. Influencers who have been doing it for a while and who are a bit more professional, they'll have a media kit that you can ask for. So in their media kit, it'll say exactly how many followers they have. It'll tell you their engagement rate as well, because just because someone has 10,000 followers doesn't necessarily mean they're getting good engagement. So their kit will tell you that, and a whole bunch of information that you'll want to look at.
So you can request it from
so just ask for a media kit.
Okay, no, that's great. So one of the questions we did have was with regards to sort of creating a minimal document. At the very base, what are sort of the key components, do you think, like the 3 basic things that you should have within your beginning stages of your formal social media guidelines?
The key things.
Yeah, you covered so much that we're like, okay. So if everyone here is just starting out and says, okay, we're gonna try this out for a week, or our goal is to get a base document together to build on. What's the base document look like?
Okay, for the bare minimum, I would say list your key social media platforms and how you intend to use them. Outline your target audience and at least one buyer persona. Okay. And then, so hard to pick. And then a piece about your content. So actually, no, I'm teetering between content and your goals. So your company goals and how your social media can support that, and what type of content you're sharing.
Okay. And how often do you think, as you build that document, how often does a company need to go back and revise that? Is it every 6 months, once a year, every couple of years, or because social media changes so rapidly?
I'd probably look at it every quarter. Okay. And that doesn't mean you have to go through it in depth line by line, but just do a quick skim and see, okay, what has changed significantly in the last little bit that we want to update, or how have our goals shifted? Okay. So quarterly.
Okay. And so this goes back into going back onto social media posts, which we talked about. You kind of gave a good idea, like 1 a day or testing it out. How many posts would you recommend sharing per day for a company sort of starting out or building up to?
It depends. So if you are on Instagram, for example, that's a platform you're going with. I would, if you're just starting out, I would start at minimum 3 posts per week.
Okay.
And that would be the same for Insta or Facebook. I would say 2 to 3 posts per week on Facebook as well would be the minimum to start off with.
Okay. And you talked a lot about hashtags. And of course, like we always laugh around the office here about creating made up hashtags, but there's obviously a system to this and some strategy. What kind of hashtags should our members be using, or how should they look up hashtags, or how do they research hashtags?
Yeah, so researching hashtags, you just want to open up Instagram and go to the search bar that's at the top there and start typing in hashtags that you think relate to your business, right? So let's say DIY, for example, is a hashtag you search up. Once you click on that hashtag, you can see how many times it was used, and Instagram will tell you other hashtags related to the thing you just punched in. To find out which hashtags are good for you to use, you want to make sure you're using ones that have not been oversaturated. So for example, hashtag food has been used 300 million times.
Yes.
So no one's going to find your content with that, right? So generally find hashtags that have been used between 80,000 to 750,000 times.
And what about using a hashtag that relates to the region or the city that you live in? Is that always a good idea too?
Yeah, absolutely. So even for me, like I work with clients from all over the world, but I still use Winnipeg and Manitoba-based hashtags to connect with my local audience as well.
And this is integrated into your document, so you just cut and paste and you know kind of what hashtags you should be using.
Exactly.
You're not typing hashtags out every time.
Yeah. Oh, no, yeah. Once you find your hashtags, I email them to myself or I type them out on my phone so I can go to my notes app and then copy it each time.
Okay. So this is my last question. So basically, I've seen some pretty fancy schmancy Instagram feeds from, with fancy little circles of different topics that things break down into. So really, like, how do we create a nice Instagram feed that's consistent and beautiful?
For sure. Really just thinking about, again, thinking about your brand visuals, right? So when you hear your company's name or you picture your company, what type of imageries do you see, and what type of colors do you see, or what type of theme do you see? And try and go on like Unsplash, for example, and find a bunch of images that you feel relate back to what you picture your company visuals being, and just curate images based off of that, right? I think people are posting a lot on the fly and just trying to find any old image or trying to take any old image. So you really need to be strategic about it and really list out, okay, here's the main colors we want to focus on, or here's the main type of images we want to use. Let's curate a whole bunch, get a whole bunch of images, look at it as a whole, and then we can kind of place them where they need to go.
Okay, that's great. Well, I think that is all the questions we have today from everybody. I want to thank you so much, Charmaine.
Yeah.
I just wanted to remind everybody that you're going to be getting an email with the link to the recording. So don't worry, you're going to get a copy of it along with Charmaine's offer for WRLA member, which includes some discounts and special opportunities just for WRLA members. We do have another webinar tomorrow. We moved our Shopify webinar to tomorrow, so designing a store that customers love, Store Fundamentals. We'll send you the link to that. And we also have Charmaine is back on November 17th. We'll send you that information. And she's going to be talking about how to design a holiday marketing campaign too. So thank you so much, Charmaine. It was great to chat to you again. And we look forward to seeing you on November 17th.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Bye. Take care.